Welcome to the Power San Diego podcast. In this episode, I ask Power San Diego Chairman Bill Powers some very basic questions about electricity. We talk about where electricity comes from, how it gets to our homes, and who owns what. And we answer a question that has puzzled me for years. What is San Diego Community Power, and why do I see it on my electricity bill? Let's get into it. On an infrastructure level, why is it that when I flip on a light switch, a light comes on?
Wow, we are getting down to basics. Okay. I'll give the 1 minute, which is the way the traditional grid is set up is there is a power plant, historically fossil fuel, like gas-fired plants. We have many of those around the San Diego area. Put in natural gas, turbine spins an electric generator, it generates electric power. And then that electric power flows over wires to individual businesses and homes. And more recently, now that we have more renewable power, solar power, wind power, they are also generating electricity, converting the heat of the sun and the sun's rays into electric power, which flows over wires, or wind turbines that convert that wind power into a spinning shaft that spins a generator that generates electricity that sends it over wires. So it's basically there's a point where the electricity is generated and then it is transported over wires to users, homes or businesses. And there's obviously more to it, but that's the basic concept.
So on a kind of basic level, conventionally, the grid is powered by something spins, and what makes that spin is either burning fossil fuels or the wind or harnessing the sun.
The only correction to that is the sun's a little different because those sun's rays hit solar cells, which generate power without anything spinning, and that then flows onto the grid. So the solar is different in that respect.
So what does SDG&E own?
Historically, SDG&E owned the generation and they owned the wires. And we deregulated our electricity provision system partially 25 years ago. And in that deregulation, the utilities spun off most of their generation, meaning plants that they used to own, they put out on the market, and third-party private companies bought those plants. And so the generation at this point is largely in third-party hands. However, I got to amend that again. The deregulation to a degree cratered about 10 years in, and SDG&E ended up buying a couple of plants back. And so now SDG&E is kind of a hybrid. They own some power plants. They own a big gas-fired power plant in Escondido. They own a big gas-fired power plant outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. However, the other power generation is generally done by third-party companies. So that's one somewhat complicated side of it on the generation. On the wires, SDG&E remains as it has remained for over a century. They own the wires. They own the high-voltage transmission wires, those coming from Imperial County, and they coming from the north, from the LA basin. And then they own all of the distribution lower voltage wires that you see overhead on the street. We have a lot of underground distribution wires in San Diego as well, but that's the current ownership pattern.
Got it. So in some instances, SDG&E owns the whole thing from generation to us. And in some cases,
Yes.
SDG&E is basically buying generated power from somebody and transporting it to us.
Yes, and there's another twist here, not to make this more complicated than it needs to be, but it is a little complicated. Is that going back to that Enron crisis 25 years ago, that was a moment in the wake of that. It was so egregious and such a ripoff that it unified the political establishment of California briefly, and they passed a law which said that political jurisdictions, cities, counties could take over the role of contracting for the power supply. And that was at the time seen as a novelty. It might be a way for us to chart our future by selecting a course of a package of power supply that would be different than what the utility would do. And 10, 12 years ago, that was hard fought. Marin County was the first one to break out and form one of these community choice aggregators. Since then, it's just swept through the state. And so now most investor-owned utility customers The power supply part of the package comes from a nonprofit community choice aggregator here in the San Diego area. It's San Diego Community Power. So their role is to select a package of sources of power supply that is then sent over SDG&E wires to individual customers.
So is San Diego Community Power now the main power generator for San Diego?
That's one way to look at it. Yes, San Diego Community Power bundles together, contracts of supply for the majority of San Diegans. And San Diegans have the option, if for some reason they don't want to be a part of that, they can stay with SDG&E. So SDG&E retains a minority of the customers, but San Diego Community Power is the primary provider of the supply portion of the bill at this point.
Okay, this is probably like too niche, but I'm trying to make sure I understand this. If I said, hey, I don't want to go with San Diego Community Power, I want to get my energy from SDG, it's not like I'd get routed to a different power plant, right? It seems like when I get electricity, I'm kind of getting a cocktail of electricity produced at different kinds of plants around that are all feeding into the grid.
That's exactly right.
So if I say, hey, I don't want San Diego Community Power, I want SDG&E, I'm still getting the same cocktail either way, right?
It's a little different than that in that fundamentally each one of those entities has an obligation to make sure that for whatever customers they have, that they're covering the customer's demand at any given moment. And so it's to a degree a paper chase, just to making sure that if in this moment your San Diego Community Power and your customers require 1,000 megawatts of power at this moment, that you've made the appropriate arrangements that your contracts will cover that need. And so the mix of power that San Diego Community Power is contracting for may be somewhat different. So they'll send you a list and say, hey, you're actually getting 55% of the electrons are coming from sources that are green. And SDG&E will say, well, for us, 45% of our suite of supply is coming from sources that are green. But fundamentally, nothing changes in terms of the wires. They both have the obligation to make sure they're completely covering their customers' demand, but how they package it is somewhat different.
Thank you so much for listening. This episode is brought to you by Power San Diego. We're working to get a measure onto this year's ballot that will take San Diego's gas and electricity out of the hands of shareholders and put it into the hands of you and me. You know, the people who live in San Diego. It'll lower our energy rates, which are among the highest in the country. It'll also make it possible for us to keep leading the country in solar so the city can get to net zero carbon emissions. We're stoked about this, but we need your help. The quickest, simplest, and most important thing you can do is sign a petition to get this ballot initiative onto the ballot. Right now, there's nothing this campaign needs more than signatures. To find out where and when folks are collecting signatures, head over to the website wearepowersandiego.com and go to the Events tab. Even better, you can sign up to volunteer and collect signatures yourself. Even if you just get signatures from your friends and family, every little bit helps. We've got a link to the website and a bunch of other useful links in the show notes. And our theme music is Canticle of the Sun by local band Church Surf. Check them out.